Coming to you by Zoom bombing your online startup meeting, I'm RJ Balde, and it's time to hash it out. The TRICHOMES Hash It Out podcast features conversations about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. In this episode, as a part of the special TRICHOMES series Convo 19, I'll be talking to Heather Manus of the Cannabis Nurses Network about how nurses are finding community while fighting on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also talk about how the CNN is preparing medical professionals for life post-pandemic, and much more. Without further ado, here is my guest, Heather Manus. All right, today I am joined by Heather Manus, founding member and CEO of the Cannabis Nurses Network, which is a professional development organization for nurses around the world. By educating nurses on the science behind cannabis and providing a global nursing community, the Cannabis Nurses Network supports and empowers nurses to implement their knowledge in their respective fields. Nurse Heather, welcome to the show.
Hello. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
No problem. We are very, very glad to have you today and to get your unique perspective. So first and foremost, how are you doing and how is your family doing during this pandemic?
We've been really blessed in my family that no one has really contracted COVID-19, which is a good thing. And we are all just pretty much staying home, sheltering in place, trying to isolate ourselves from the world at large to try and, bend this curve a little bit so that we can have a healthy community moving forward.
Have you been able to sort of connect with your family members and loved ones through whether that be social media or video chatting, Zoom meetings, anything like that?
We've been doing a lot of phone calls. My parents are elderly, and I've had to cancel 3 different flights that I was going to try and make to get back to New Mexico to see them. But it's okay because I feel like it's the responsible thing to do to kind of let all this blow over a little bit, and then I'll go see my parents. But my dad actually has dementia, and so it's really funny. I get the daily phone call. He actually just called me right before I was hopping on with you, and it's cute because we're from New Mexico, and his frame of reference is as far as the hantavirus. And so every time he gets on the phone with me, every single day, it's the same conversation. This is, are you guys staying safe from the hantavirus? And it just cracks me up. It's very cute.
Wow. Well, I love that you guys are still able to connect during this time. I think that's very important for people to be able to have those avenues of connection, because it's very easy to feel isolated during a time like this because we are physically isolated. So to keep that mental space of knowing that you have ways to connect to your loved ones, I think is very important.
Yeah, and I'm here with my husband. He's a gem. I actually enjoy being with him. So it's been
That's a key.
It's been a nice time for us to spend together also. And I do worry about those that are out there in not so loving relationships, or children that are in homes that aren't quite safe, or those who don't have someone with them. And I know that the mental health toll that can be taken for many people is great. And so even as I sit here in my happy state of mind and trying to do the right thing, I'm not naive in understanding that the world at large has a lot of issues that we will only start to find out about, I'm sure, after this is kind of cleared up a little bit more.
And hopefully sooner rather than later. Now, I understand that you are a registered nurse and you have a specialization in both medical marijuana and psychiatric home health care. Is that correct?
Yeah, so mental health, psychiatric care, specifically in-home care, is my background. Mm-hmm. And I've been a nurse now for 11 years, and cannabis has pretty much been a part of that my entire nursing career. I was actually in a situation where one of my patients was the 5th card-holding patient in the state of New Mexico. He had multiple sclerosis, and when I received his medical records, I looked at his medication sheet, and right at the top it said cannabis. And now, for me as a nurse, that was the first time I had ever seen cannabis listed as a medication officially. And so it really opened up the doorway for me to ask a lot of questions to find out what he was doing and how he was using it. And interestingly enough, his caregiver was helping him to grow it. And then she'd also make him products that he could use. And so I learned a great deal about smokeless alternatives and how they could be used for really serious health conditions. And I always knew about cannabis. I personally have had a relationship with the plant since I was about 16 years old.
Mhm.
But in a medical setting, that was the first time, and it really did shine a light on what needed to happen, what could happen, and I never turned back. I've helped a lot of patients with their cannabinoid therapeutics and education, and it's been just really quite a joy. And I couldn't be happier with the career choice that I made.
So was that initial experience with that patient sort of your jumping off point to creating the Cannabis Nurses Network?
Not really. The
Okay.
network came about. I went to my first medical cannabis conference in 2012. And that was the first time that I had face to face interaction with doctors, researchers, other nurses that were doing that kind of work. And I had been part of, as soon as I learned about cannabis in my state, um, I was actually approached. Someone had asked me to be part of their board. And so I've been part of the licensing process since 2009 and have always kind of had licenses and did dabbled in different industry parts of it. But after really connecting with the science and the research, that's where my connections with nurses started to happen. And so I've been part of the cannabis industry, as I said, since 2009.
Mhm.
And over that amount of time, my network and people that I've been able to interact with has just grown exponentially. And so the network came about in about 2015. We started gathering once a year as nurses, just to support our nurses and do some education where we could teach each other, learn from each other, and just connect. And that started in 2015. Fast forward to today, in 2020, we'll be hosting our fifth annual Continued Education Nursing Conference that we bring these experts from all over the country to come and educate nurses. And it's the network has just been wonderful for that fact of networking, being able to connect, the partnerships, the relationships, the friendships that have been able to develop uh, through the network has really exceeded my expectations. And so it's my focus. It's a joy in my life. And um, pretty much every day I wake up and think, how can I help our nurses learn more, connect more, and be more successful? And so through the network, we have it's a professional development network, and we try to meet nurses where they are and provide them what they need in that moment.
And that conference that you mentioned, is that the one that's scheduled for September of this year?
It is. And this is a really weird year for conferences.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my question. So we don't know how the weird thing is we don't know how far we're allowed to plan into the future right now because of how uncertain everything is. So for now, it's still on.
It is. And
Okay.
we when this whole thing happened, we kind of took a step back and said, okay, let's sit on this for a minute and see what's going to happen. But as we're getting closer to it, I'm actually in California. The conference itself happens in San Diego.
Hmm.
And we know that California will be slowly reopening over the next couple of months. And so we feel like we're pretty safe by September. Now, instead of handing out, lighters or swag bags, we may be
Hmm.
handing out masks and gloves. And that's
Sure.
okay. I think that's all part of this new normal. Um, but specifically for nurses, being on the front lines, going through what they're going through right now, I believe, and for me, and what I'm hearing feedback from our nurses is that having this conference in September is really giving us all something to look forward to, that time when we can finally connect with one another, and be there to support each other and in person. That's with all planning, we say we have plan A, B, and C. So plan A, as it goes as planned, we're all there and it's great. Plan B would be that we just have our speakers there and we do a live stream. And plan C would be kind of what we're all dabbling in right now, which is the Zoom conference or a virtual conference of sorts. So we are thinking ahead and making preparations for whichever way we need to pivot.
Now, the Cannabis Nurses Network has, if I'm getting this right, over 600 nationwide members. Is that right?
We do, and
Nice.
it's just growing exponentially. When we think about a cannabis nurse, you know, the stigma part of it says, oh, it's a nurse that helps their patients get high, and that's not really what we do. A cannabis nurse is a nurse who has learned about the endocannabinoid system. They don't teach us about this in nursing school. They don't teach doctors about it in medical school. And so, really, one of the driving forces behind the network is to bring the endocannabinoid system knowledge forward. Because once a nurse learns about it, quite frankly, it helps everything else make sense because it's a system that touches every other system. And that's why cannabinoids are so beneficial for so many different disease processes. So, a cannabis nurse is really, whether they're utilizing cannabinoid therapeutics or other ways to care and feed the endocannabinoid system, it is a nurse who knows about the largest receptor signaling system in our body, which is the endocannabinoid system.
In what ways have you had to sort of shift the focus of the work through the Cannabis Nurses Network due to the pandemic, if at all?
That's a great question. And, we've spent the last 2 years developing our online platform. So we have, and this is a plug, I'm just giving them out there, but the cannabisnursesnetwork.com is our public facing website. It's where you can go to get information. You can see our Speakers Bureau members. You can request a speaker from our Nursing Speakers Bureau. There's different things that are there. But when a nurse actually signs up to be a member of the Cannabis Nurses Network, they go through cnnmembers.com, which is our private platform. We have an app, and it's available for nurses to be able to really connect. They can direct message one another. They can post publicly for everyone to see. We do educational webinars. And one of the things that we've really added to it since the COVID experience here is that we now do a weekly roundtable, where we just connect with our nurses. It's nothing that we plan really or prepare for. We just choose nurses from our network to come on and talk around the round table. Kind of like just the family chatter on a Friday night. And that's what we've been doing. And it has been really beneficial for helping our nurses feel connected so that we can know what's going on across the country. We have nurses in New York all the way to Hawaii. And so bringing them on to let us know what's going on with them and what their experiences are has been really beneficial for all of us.
And what are you hearing from the nurses and the healthcare professionals that are fighting on the front line of the pandemic? What are they experiencing? What do they need? And what can we do to help them?
All great questions. And so it spans across the board, right? So some of our nurses are working in the ER. Obviously, there's a lot of trials with that, the personal protection equipment, the just the trauma, the stress, the fear of bringing it home to their loved ones. We have nurses that work in psychiatric hospitals, psych hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because in the psych world, we always kind of take a little bit of a back burner. So they were slower to move in getting personal protective equipment for those nurses. I'm thinking of one nurse in particular that they have had an outbreak at their psych hospital. And I cannot think of a more scary thing than being a patient in a psych hospital where there's a viral pandemic going on. So that weighs heavily on our nurses, because what nurses do is they care. They are compassionate and they're there to help. And when they themselves don't feel safe or protected, it makes their quality of care a little more high energy. And so we are seeing across the board that nurses that are working in the traditional healthcare system, that they are all experiencing to some level the PPE shortage, the lack of direction, and also just having, not having that clear focus. They're telling us that policies are changing, from one week to the next, from one day to the next. And so it's been very difficult for nurses. Those nurses that maybe aren't working on the front lines in the healthcare industry, there's an array of emotions that are going on with them. Some of them feel like they need to get out there and go help their colleagues. Others are just super relieved that they don't have to be part of it. Some nurses feel very guilty that they're not really in a position to be out there and help. And so we're taking all of this in, trying to look at the emotional toll that's going on, the actual, stress of being in a facility where this virus is present, and being worried about bringing it home. So we're looking at all those things and just trying to lend support where we can. It's not something where I can say, everybody get your PPE and bring it to the hospital. That's not even really something we can do. But I think for nurses, what they need is to know that they are loved, they are appreciated, we see them, we hear them, and we're here to connect with them and support them through this process. Post-traumatic stress is kind of my niche. And so as I'm watching this, I can see the trauma happening. And one of the things that I've shared with our members is, I said, I would not be a good nurse in the ER. That's not the kind of nursing I do. But what I can do is I can be here and get these tools prepared. So after the trauma has occurred and our nurses are trying to then rebuild their lives or work through that trauma, I will be right here to help support them with that. So it's all nurses have different specialties. And so we're encouraging our nurses to look at their specialties, recognize themselves as important, and to start taking steps to use their specialized nature to help where they can, but definitely to, not feel bad if they're not in the ER. Don't rush to the ER if you're not that kind of nurse.
And I think that's really great work for you and the Cannabis Nurses Network to do, to provide that sort of support and encouragement and morale boost for these people who are literally on the front line of what feels like a war and are facing such heavy amounts of trauma on a day-to-day basis, and seeing so many very harrowing scenes that the majority of us probably wouldn't even imagine being able to deal with on a daily basis. So talking post-pandemic here, we're talking, you mentioned earlier that the Cannabis Nurses Network is hosting weekly roundtables to discuss how nurses and medical professionals can find that sort of support during all of this and prepare for life after the coronavirus. So what kind of advice are you giving to medical professionals, and what is the importance of post-traumatic growth over post-traumatic stress?
Oh, look at you. You did your research.
Yes, indeed.
So the first thing that I will say about the roundtable is, and I pretty much say this every week, I said, none of us are experts in COVID-19. We've never experienced this before. We can only speak from what we're experiencing right now. The roundtables came up as a way to connect. We will do the roundtables every Friday night until our nurses no longer need them, want them, or want to participate in them. So it's something that we've got there. But last week, one of the things that we do through the network is we provide online educational content. So we do educational webinars. We have, continued education programs that are available. But last week, I recorded a webinar that has been a theory of mine, because post-traumatic growth is something that I've utilized with my patients for years and years and years. And I finally, last week, recorded a webinar on post-traumatic growth, which I call the Lotus Theory. And it was really, I felt a little bit strange doing it because it was such new content. But the feedback that I've been receiving from nurses that have watched that webinar has just really touched my heart. And I think that post-COVID, looking at post-traumatic growth, it is going to be a very necessary piece to healing from this trauma that those on the front line have experienced. Those who have contracted the disease and have been sick, they'll need that. And it goes, post-traumatic growth spans across the board. It's not just for nurses, but also for our patients. And I do, post-traumatic growth is a positive result that comes from a tragic event, and really using trauma as a springboard to launch ourselves into self-actualization, or experiencing life at a whole nother level. And that's where my focus is right now, is really creating a toolkit for our nurses, so that as they get to that point where they're needing to start pulling out of the trauma and start growing, that we'll have these tools available for them to help them on their journey toward growth.
Now, one of the many issues facing the nation during this crisis is the availability of testing, coronavirus testing. The president has been itching to reopen the country's economy and ease up quarantine guidelines, while at the same time, governors, state officials, health organizations, Dr. Fauci, they've all said that that wouldn't really be plausible until tests, tracing, and treatment are widely available. So, have you had any experience with trying to obtain a coronavirus test? And if so, can you tell me how that went for you?
Yeah, twofold. So my son, when they brought in again, I'm in California, when they brought in the ships and brought a bunch of the passengers off, they kept some of them quarantined right across the street from where my son works. And, a few weeks had gone by, my son got sick. And so I tried to get him a test. This was in February, I believe. I tried to get him a test, and we couldn't get him tested. Even though he had symptoms, he was very sick, and he couldn't get a test. So we just, quarantined him, took care of him. He got better. Life is good, but we don't know if he was exposed to COVID or not. There's that side of the testing. And I know that, testing has increased a little bit, but not enough, right? We need a lot more testing to be able to really reopen the economy. Now, the testing that I personally feel is most relevant to opening up, because the researchers here in California are looking at, why has California not peaked the way that we were, supposed to peak? We didn't really see that peak. And so what the researchers are saying is that they believe, or they have the theory of, that COVID-19 has been here, coronavirus has been here since probably late last year, and that we may have already had our peak because California had reported an early flu season. So they're kind of looking at that. But the test that we really need to determine that is the antibody test. And the antibody test will say, yes, you've been exposed to the coronavirus, COVID-19, and you have gotten better, and now you have the antibodies toward it. Now, there's some debate on whether the antibodies are really, a determinant of whether you have immunity to getting COVID. But it's also a really good way to say, have you been exposed and you got over it? So last week, this is a personal story. Last week, I called my healthcare provider and I said, look, I was sick in December. And I actually had close interaction. My husband and I hosted some nationals from China. in December, late November, early December, and I got very sick in December.
Mhm.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking I probably have already been exposed to this, but I would like to know. So I contacted my healthcare providers and they said, we are not doing those tests. You need to contact the CDC. So we contacted the CDC and said, I believe that I've had exposure to this and I would like to get a test. They said, we are not doing tests nationally. You need to contact your state Department of Health. So I contacted the California Department of Health and said, I believe I was exposed. I would like to get an antibody test. And they said, we are not doing antibody tests at a state level. You need to contact your local Department of Health. I'm in San Diego. So I contacted the San Diego County Department of Health and said, I would like to get a test. And it was very interesting because the woman on the other end of the line said, I believe I was exposed in February and I would like to get a test too.
Wow.
And there is no tests available. So as of last week, I asked the woman at that point, I said, look, I've talked to my healthcare provider, CDC, state, and now local. Have I made the full loop? Is there anyone else I need to talk to? And she said, Heather, these tests are not available. So that's where we are with antibody tests. And from my perspective, this is me personally, I believe that if we can know who has been exposed, that gives us a really good indication of who can go back to work more safely. And I believe that these antibody tests, in conjunction with the COVID testing to make sure people aren't carrying the virus in the moment, that those tests together, widespread testing, are really going to be what can get our economy open back up safely. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know, because we do see that steps are already being taken to open up, loosen restrictions, whatever, without having this testing in place. So I will be following it closely. We probably will have a boomerang effect where we have another, big outbreak of it, or it could potentially be a worse outbreak later in the fall. But we're all following that, and nobody knows. Hindsight will be 2020. We won't know who made the right decisions, who was overboard and who was, too loose with it. We won't know that until later. So we're all just in the, as they say, we're all in this together, and nobody really has all the answers, but we are critical thinkers as nurses. So we can kind of look at these things and say, yeah, test us.
Yeah. Oh,
So we
absolutely.
know if we can get back to work or not.
Yeah, I got sick also in December, around December time, and everyone around me was sick also. My whole family, like all of my coworkers, like we all got sick around that time. And I remember I had the dry cough, I had a fever, I was like bedridden for a good solid amount of time. I don't even remember how long.
I was sick for 3 weeks. I was sick for 3
You were sick
weeks.
for 3 weeks? Yeah. My brother was sick for about that long too.
And so it
Yeah.
makes us all wonder, was it
Mm-hmm.
here? And we didn't know anything about coronavirus in December. Okay. So I'll just put that out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I had all those same symptoms, even the difficulty breathing, the major fatigue. But December had to be working, right? So in December, we had the big show, I call it the big show, but the marijuana business conference in Las Vegas. And I was there. I was there and I was sick. I wouldn't share any joints with people. I definitely kept, a little bit of distance, but it wasn't like what they're saying we need to be keeping. But I was there. And, later I thought this, if I had coronavirus and I went to the marijuana big show in Las Vegas, how many people did I expose? How many other people were sick? Because a lot of people were sick during that time.
Yeah.
And it just makes us all kind of wonder, was this here in December? I don't know. I'd like to get the test.
Right? Yeah. It'd be nice to know, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Wouldn't it? Now, I have a curious question for you because you have so far an illustrious career, very many accolades. For example, Cannabis Business Awards in both 2015 and 2017 named you Activist of the Year. You played a big role in getting PTSD listed as a debilitating condition under Arizona's medical marijuana program, and you were a big part in opening the first licensed medical cannabis facility in the state that focused on smokeless cannabis products. So, how difficult was it for you to do that in a traditionally conservative state such as Arizona? And how good of a personal friend to you is Joe Arpaio?
Ah, well, I always say this when we look back on the things that we've done in this industry. I always say I didn't know any better. And I
Right.
didn't know that things were going to be as hard as they were or as important as they were. It was just what needed to be done in the moment. So, also in New Mexico, I was the first to bring the smokeless alternatives to the table. I went to the Department of Health and said, hey, right now, cannabis flower is the only thing that's available to patients. We need to have some options because I have patients on oxygen that can't be smoking. So that kind of started there. And then because of my work in New Mexico with that, I was asked to come to Arizona by my partner and now my husband, Ken Sobel. And we opened the third dispensary in the state, but we did get the first license for smokeless, for infused products. And so we actually had the only license for 9 months, which was really cool until another company got a license also. But we held the market for 9 months. So it gave us a really good opportunity to bring these healthy alternative products to patients in Arizona. Now, in New Mexico, we have had post-traumatic stress disorder as a qualifying condition basically since day one. We were the first and only state to have it. So when I moved from New Mexico, where I was working with a whole lot of PTSD patients, moved to Arizona, and they didn't even have it listed. I said, well, my husband is actually an attorney. And I said, we've got to get this listed. I mean, let's do it. Right. How hard
Right.
can it be? And little did I realize, because I was kind of naive. I didn't know about red states and blue states and conservatism. I didn't really know all of that until I got into it. And once we kind of peeled back that curtain, I was no longer naive to what was going on and how the political side of what was happening there was literally keeping patients from being able to access medicine that could help them. And we went to court. We did a 4-day evidentiary hearing. The first time it's ever been done. I think it's the only time. It was a precedent setting case. And it was the first time ever that a Department of Health Services was ordered by the court to add a qualifying condition, and that condition was post-traumatic stress. And what we saw was states like Washington State, Hawaii, many other states. There were about 10 of them within the first year that just added post-traumatic stress disorder to their list of qualifying conditions. And now we do see that so many patients that suffer from post-traumatic stress do have access through a legal framework in their state to be able to access medicine, cannabis medicine.
I love that. That is such noble and important work.
And we were actually able to prove that cannabis is not only safe and effective for post-traumatic stress, but it may be the most safe and the most effective medicine for post-traumatic stress. And I will stand firmly in that belief until the day I die, because I have seen so many people suffer at the hands of the pharmaceutical treatments. And cannabis is a gentle plant medicine that helps with this endocannabinoid deficiency that naturally happens when a person suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely. It is Earth Day, and so we definitely want to give props up to something that comes straight from the earth, straight from the source. It's how could it not be the most effective and the most simple way to obtain any sort of healing if it's something that naturally occurs all around us?
We are natural beings, aren't we? Happy Earth Day to you.
Happy Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. Yes, indeed. I love that the earth is thriving now that we've all been inside. That's like a nice sort of bright side.
Mother Earth will take care of herself if humanity will allow her. So,
no doubt. So we got to go here in just a little bit, but before we go, where can our listeners find you and find the Cannabis Nurses Network?
They can come to cannabisnursesnetwork.com to see what the network itself is doing. If you are a nurse and you would like to join or be a member, it's cnnmembers.com. We have social media things, so Cannabis Nurses Network on, Instagram and Facebook and different things like that. And if you really want to see me and get to know me, come to San Diego in September on the 3rd and 4th to the Cannabis Nurses Network conference that will be happening. I'm holding firm to my affirmation there.
Yes, indeed.
And the title of our conference is A Revolution in Healthcare. And we are truly going to be taking an advanced look at cannabinoid therapeutics and how we are going to be able to utilize nature to revolutionize healthcare. So come join us.
Absolutely. Holding out for September. I love it. Heather, thank you so much again for coming on the show. Thank you for the work that you do. I have a lot of family that are in the medical field. They're nurses, they're medical technologists, they work in the labs. And so I am very grateful for the opportunity to get to talk to you, and I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing through your organization.
Thank you so much for the time today, and take care of yourself. Wash your hands, social distance, and be well.
Absolutely. You too. Nurse Heather, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
My thanks again to Heather Manus for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@trichomes.com. You can help others find the show by taking a moment to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by trichomes.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening.